Okay, now that we're recording. Okay. Hi, everyone. I hope you all had a great day, and I just wanted to say thank you for joining us for the fourth and final webinar in our series, Here We Grow. This is the last event in this series, and all of which have been made possible by RBC and our wonderful mentors from Food for All New Brunswick, who are our speakers for these events. So thank you to everyone who made this series possible. We will be recording this webinar, as I said earlier, and they will be made available. All the recordings from the previous series will be made available after this series is complete. So stay tuned for more information later on. The purpose of this series is to increase our knowledge on growing, preserving, and finding local food. This is a great way to kickstart the launch of our very own indoor hydroponic farm, which is located in Blacks Harbor, New Brunswick. Our indoor farm will support 50 hydroponic towers and shelving to grow a variety of leafy greens, herbs, and microgreens. This is ECW's way to bring fresh and nutritious food to our community through controlled environment agriculture. Controlled environment agriculture, or CEA for short, encompasses a variety of systems that take technology-based approach to farming. CEA can range from greenhouse gases to full indoor vertical farms. The most advanced systems are fully automated, closed-loop systems with controlled lighting, water, and ventilation. One interesting benefit of having CEA like this, such as ours as well, is that they can produce food all year long and even in places as cold as Canada. So remember, those of you who stuck with us through all 4 webinars will be entered into a draw to win one of 2 prizes: a residential aeroponic tower kit for your home, or a veg pod raised garden bed. We will also be holding a Q&A portion after the webinar, so hold on to your questions, okay? You can either put them in the chat or you can unmute later to directly ask your questions. We're gonna make that possible later on. We also ask that you introduce yourself on the chat box so that we have a log of who's in here. We can shout it out. We can say hi to you later on. If you'd like more information or to be updated with what ECW is doing in our community, please check out our Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter pages. Thanks to everyone who is here tonight and to those who tune in for all our 4 webinars in this series. We will be doing the draw for both the Veg Pod and the Grow Tower Kit on Monday, January 22nd. Our last but certainly not the least speaker is Jossilynn Flewelling. She is here to share her knowledge on budget-wise food procurement and medicinal plants. Jossilynn has always been passionate about health and well-being at its core. With her background as a massage therapist, holistic nutritionist, and community herbalist, she finds joy in serving her community by providing healthy food, education, and other tools to support healthy living. In her spare time, you can find her getting her hands dirty in garden or foraging in the woods and making sourdough bread. Thanks again for joining us tonight, Jossilynn. And before I give you the floor, I would put in the presentation that we have for tonight. So if you could just give me 1 second. Okay, here we go. Are you seeing my screen? Jossilynn, I think you're on mute or something.
Okay, all set.
Are you seeing my screen, Jossilynn, well?
Yes, I can see your screen now, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, so you can go to the next slide. So for tonight, the agenda is going to be talking about our economical food staples and some ways that we can use them, getting more from the food that we eat. And so I'll talk about tips on how to get more bioavailable nutrients out of your food. And that's a mouthful of a word there. And I will explain that when we get to it. And then we're going to talk about some medicinal plants and nutritional plants that you can harvest from wherever you live and use those for essentially nature's multivitamins. And then at the end, we'll do some Q&A and some resources. So this is just a quick list, my top 10 sort of personal favorites. And there are a couple on there, or that are not on there, that most people would expect. Rice is one of them, and I'll talk about that when we get there. So you can see the list: oats, potatoes, dry beans and lentils, canned tomatoes and paste, plain yogurt, healthy fats, meats, eggs, spices and seasonings, and flour. So we're going to go through each one of those. This part I'm going to go through a little bit more quickly because I have a feeling that the herbal things and the wild foods are going to be more of interest to the audience based on who's attending tonight. So first thing is oats. We've got 3 different kinds that are normally on the market. So rolled, quick, and steel cut. Each one has its own advantages. Plain old rolled oats, not the quick kind, is my favorite because it's the most versatile. It's easy to turn into oat flour if you want to use it for baking. It cooks up really quickly, and it's great for overnight oats. Quick oats are good for people who need food in a hurry. Steel cuts take a little longer to cook, but they're worth it. Lots of fiber. The other thing that I really love about oats is that you can buy them in giant bags, and as long as you make sure that they're in an airtight container, you can find them for a really good price. And one of the things that I do with a lot of the things on this list is I buy giant quantities and I coordinate with my friends to save money. And oats in particular are a very good deal from the Spearville flour mill that's here in New Brunswick. And most places have a mill of some kind or an outlet where, say, restaurants would buy their products from in bulk. And so I'll arrange that with a group of people where I set up an order. Spearville requires $500 for shipment in New Brunswick, anywhere in New Brunswick. So my friends and I will collaborate and make an order where I'll get a 50-pound bag of oats and someone else will get a 50-pound bag of rye berries or whatever it is that they need. Spearville has all kinds of things. They're really great for that. So that's one reason that I really like to use Spearville. And then this is where I pop in why rice is not on my list. White rice offers so much less nutrient density by weight. So, 100 grams of oats and 100 grams of rice, the nutrient density is just not there. It's a great food. It's got a long shelf life, but in terms of buying food that gives you more nutrition for the money that you spend, oats is the one that would be my number one for grains. Next slide. Okay, plain yogurt. This one is another one that's on my list because it's so easy to find. You can find it at any grocery store. Despite the fact that there's a best before date on it, you can often find it at 50% off because it went bad yesterday or today. And you can still consume it for a long time. So that's something that can be very economical, offers a lot of nutritional density. It offers good probiotics. And it's actually really easy to make yourself. And I'll show you a thing that I use at home to make my own yogurt. It's something that you can add into a lot of recipes to add good calcium. You can use it for any kind of sauces or smoothies or dips. I throw it into baking when I'm making muffins or a recipe like that. I use it in a lot of my sourdough recipes. And I'm sure most people are familiar with yogurt, so it's not rocket science. The best ones are the ones with not a lot of sugar. You can add fruit at home if you want to, but the ones that come with fruit are really loaded with sugar usually. So that's pretty simple. And when I'm choosing yogurt, I usually choose a high protein one because protein is one of the hardest parts of our diet to get for an economical price. Next slide. Canned tomatoes and sauce. I have a love-hate relationship with canned tomatoes because they're a lot of work. But they are an amazing base for soups and pasta and sauces and all kinds of different things. The shelf life is very long, and the economics of it when you buy them in cans at the store is pretty good. I'm a canner. I love to can things. And I often end up buying my canned tomatoes and canned sauce because they do take a lot of energy. So to make a tomato paste that you would have in a little can at home, like the ones that are about this big, might take you 9 hours of boiling it on the stove to get it down to the right consistency. That's a lot of energy. So it's really not that economical. But one thing about cans, and you have to pay attention to this if you care about your health, is that a lot of can liners are a plastic resin called BPA. There's been a lot in the news about it. All the BP plastics are really not great for you. But the BPA plastic lines so many of the canned foods that we eat, everything from soups to nuts kind of thing, anything that comes in a can. But with the acidity level that's in a tomato, it can be especially possible that it's leaching out into the food that's in the can. So most companies that use BPA free liners will announce it loudly on their label, so you can see that on a label. But the best choice would be glass, or to purchase or to can it yourself. So buy them in glass bottles or make it yourself. And I saw someone questioned what's the purpose of putting the liner in the can, and it's actually because a lot of times the food will corrode the metal because it's metal inside, that it'll rust otherwise over time. Next slide. Okay, dry beans and lentils. This is another one. Spearville Flour Mill is really great for this. They have all kinds of dry beans and lentils in bulk. And I actually tend to buy them at like the wholesale club, or Costco even sometimes will have a big bag of beans for a really good price. They keep for a long time. My one thing about beans is that I buy bags of beans and then I forget to cook them because they take a very long time. But I found a cheat this year that works really well for me, and it's using the pressure canner to cook them. Normally when they take a really long time, you boil them for hours and hours. Pressure canner, they can be done in under an hour, which is really nice. So I will do that instead, or I'll use them for something that's going to cook for a long time, like a stew. They are another economical protein source. And for people who choose to eat more plant-based, which is really, most people lean that way now, it seems like there's a really big push towards plant-based protein. Beans are a really good source for that, that's not processed and that you can cook at home. Of course, the high fiber content and the nutrient density that comes along with that. And I have a lot of cheat recipes where I use beans in muffin recipes or brownie recipes or cake recipes, that sort of thing. I even have a recipe for red bean ice cream, and I've only made it once, but it was actually pretty good. So that's for beans. And then lentils are similar. They cook up to be a little bit more mushy. There aren't very many lentils, just the brown one that I know of that holds its shape. But the red ones tend to go kind of mushy, and the green ones tend to go kind of mushy. So I don't use them as often, just for that reason. Unless I'm going to make a soup, I'll use beans instead. That's it for that one. And then the next slide. Okay, so healthy fats. This is a really challenging one because healthy fats are not cheap. And in order to be economical with your healthy fat, you've got to do things like buy in bulk. Costco has a really good price on coconut oil. That's surprising, actually, that the price hasn't gone up a lot. But coconut oil is a really good fat for lots of things. It can handle high heat, so it's good for cooking and frying. It's the saturated fat, but it's a plant-based fat. So it's easy to digest, doesn't stick to your arteries. It's a really good fat for all kinds of things. Like you can put it on your skin, more than just eating it. You can use it for lots of things. Butter and ghee. So butter is butter, like everybody knows. And then ghee is a clarified butter that has the milk solids removed from it. Ghee has a longer shelf life. So I tend to buy and use ghee for some different things. This is going to sound strange, but I really like a tablespoon of ghee whipped into a cup of coffee. It's a really nice, like creamy, buttery kind of flavor in a coffee. Ghee, strangely, the best price I've ever seen on ghee was at Walmart, of all places, Walmart. And the only thing that I look at when I'm buying ghee is that there is one on the market that's called a vegetable ghee. And don't be fooled, it is not good for you. It's a vegetable oil based production of what's supposed to be ghee. So it's sort of like the vegetable oil shortening version of clarified butter. So don't be fooled. That's not a better choice. Tallow, I'm not sure if people know what tallow is, but it is a fat that's collected from around the kidneys of an animal, mostly beef because they have a lot of it. And it can be rendered into a fat that can be used to cook. And fun fact, it was actually the fat that McDonald's used to fry their French fries in when they first started. So it's a really amazing fat for using for cooking things like if you wanted to do roasted potatoes or your own French fries or fry up something in a pan. Like it's just a little bit of that goes a long way, and it's really, really tasty. One other really interesting thing about tallow, this is a skin fact, but tallow actually has the same essential fatty acid profile as the oil that comes out of our skin. And so it's really useful as a topical skin product. I use a lot of it for things like eczema or psoriasis, and I sell a lot of it because it really works, because it matches our profile. And then the last thing on my list for fats is bacon fat. And I also have a love-hate relationship with this because I love to cook with it, but you have to have a lot of bacon. Interesting, though, a lot of restaurants that are like greasy spoon restaurant places that cook bacon regularly have like a bucket that they put the bacon fat in because they can't dump it down the drain. And if you are interested in getting bacon fat for using for cooking or baking or that kind of thing, I have a fabulous recipe for bacon fat spice cookies. Um, they're not all bacon fat, it's just a little bit to be that where the butter would have went. Um, but if you're interested in making a relationship with an owner of a restaurant that does bacon, like a breakfast place that's in your neighborhood, you might be able to secure bacon fat for free. And it's a really nice thing to just fry up things with. It's good on potatoes. It's good mixed in with all kinds of vegetables and different things, just a little bit of that smoky bacon taste. So there's that. Beef tallow is the kind of thing that you've got to buy from your butcher. And then usually you've got to render it. I'm sure somebody sells it already rendered, but I doubt that it's economical based on how much work it takes, because I know because I do it. um, okay, next slide. Okay, and then, oh, thanks, Kenzie, for the tallow is beef and lard is pig. You're absolutely right about that. Yeah, lard is the hard fat that comes from a pig. You're right. Okay, so meats and fish. This is another one that is also sometimes tough to do economically, but buying direct from your farmer is the best way to go. If you know somebody who raises meat, if you know somebody who raises birds, or somebody who's got chickens for eggs, all of this stuff, it's definitely, well, better for your community, better for the planet if you're buying from someone that you know. And sometimes you can get a good price. It's never going to be the $1.99 a pound organic beef that you want it to be. But finding it's somewhere that you can buy in bulk. Like, for example, I usually buy a half a cow to have for the freezer to eat for the year. And it's definitely a significant investment to buy that much meat at once, but you can collaborate with people that you know in order to get your meat, like all of that meat, for a really good price, because buying half the cow is definitely cheaper than going to the grocery store and buying it pound for pound. So it's another thing where you kind of have to collaborate with your community. And if you want to put some meat in your freezer for a decent price and buy it from someone that you know, there are many steps in this process. But that's a really good way to do it. And sometimes it's beef, like that's a big animal. So, buying a half of a cow is a lot of meat, and you can divide that among a lot of people. For something like chicken, you could go to a farmer who does a certain number of birds, and, sometimes they'll do half birds, sometimes they'll do whole birds. But you could end up buying like maybe 10 chickens for a certain price and then divide them among people or put them in your freezer, doing it that way. The other thing is to get trimmings from a butcher shop or a fish market or a farmer's market. Every butcher trims meat to make it look nice when they package it and put it out. And there's always a little bit of meat left on those trimmings. And especially for fish markets, they cut off things like the head, they cut off lots of good meat that could be used for making soups or broths. And that's a really good way to get a little bit of extra meat for not a lot of money. The next thing is unusual cuts. I'm not sure how many people here have tried some of the things on my unusual list, like tongue or hocks or marrow bones and organ meats. A beef tongue is actually one of my favorite meats to eat. It is the most tender cut of beef you'll ever eat, and there's not a bone in it or any gristle or anything. It's wonderful. And when I tell people that that's one of my favorites, most people kind of like, ugh, that's gross. But it's honestly, if you can get past having to peel the skin off the tongue and like enjoy the meat, it's really, really delicious. And they're very inexpensive. It's a really inexpensive cut of meat. So that like those unusual cuts are really like good things to try, and it gives you an opportunity to try recipes that you wouldn't otherwise try. I sometimes will have friends over when I want to try something weird like that, and we'll make it a potluck, and that way if my thing isn't good, there'll be something good on the table. But I haven't had very many flops, so it's all right. um, Whole chickens, this is another thing with buying from somebody that you know. If you get a whole bird, you've got literally meals for days. You've got your the night you cook it, and then you've got your leftovers, and then there's always a soup somewhere in the end. If you do buy in bulk and you don't have the freezer space, I sometimes will buy things and either dehydrate them. So say, for example, if I bought some fish that I wanted to preserve but didn't want to freeze, I could either can it in a pressure canner, or I might dehydrate it. And sometimes I'll do that because it makes really quick meal prep down the road. So I'll cook my meat and then put it in my food dehydrator. That's a very useful tool. You can do it in your oven. It's a little bit different there. You kind of have to make sure the setting is really low for the temperature, but you can do it in your oven. But once you dehydrate your meat, then when you want to use it, you literally put it in a bowl or a container and cover it with boiling water and give it 10 minutes, and it fluffs back up and hydrates, and then you can use it in a recipe. So it's really handy for things like not roast beef, ground beef. If you have dehydrated ground beef and you want to cook something really fast, I don't know if other people have this problem, but there are lots of times when I want ground beef for supper, but it's still frozen. And it's the kind of thing where it's like, oh man, like I could add some really nice protein to this dish that I'm making if I had half an hour to cook this from frozen. But dehydrating it makes it a little bit faster, and it also has a very long shelf life. So if you've dehydrated it and you store it in an airtight container, then you don't have to worry that it's going to go bad. It's good for years, like literally years. The one thing is that you can't dehydrate really fatty cuts of meat. So if you had something like pork, I wouldn't dehydrate pork. It wouldn't keep for very long because it's kind of a fatty meat. But that's really the only one I can think of that I probably wouldn't dehydrate. Yeah. And then the last thing on my list is that bones are mineral gold. Bone broth, like if you have any kind of cut of meat that's got a bone in it, save them up until you have enough to make a bone broth with them, because there are so many minerals stored in those bones that you can get out of there. And the one really important thing with making a bone broth is to add a little bit of apple cider vinegar. Other vinegar will work too, but if you add a little bit of apple cider vinegar to the broth, it will help to extract those minerals from the bones. It'll help to pull it out. Next slide. Okay, the humble potato. These ones, everybody's got a bag of potatoes, I think. Very cheap, lots of shelf stability. One interesting thing is that most people don't know a potato actually has just as much vitamin C. If you eat the whole potato, you got to eat the skin and the flesh, as an orange, if you can believe that. So they're a really good thing to eat and to have in your pantry because they're so versatile. You can use them for so many different things. Eating just as they are, roasted, you can turn them into breakfast things, you can turn them into gnocchi pasta, all kinds of different ways that you can use potatoes. And then the skin is so full of minerals. And the one thing, this is on my list, we've got minerals of like folate, magnesium, iron, niacin, manganese. And then I have a little star next to selenium because for people who live here in New Brunswick, like I do, the soil here is very deficient in selenium. And it's one of the things that farmers around here need to supplement in their soil if they want to include it in the food. It doesn't affect our crops terribly. It does affect our livestock though. So pretty much all livestock in New Brunswick that eats New Brunswick grown, say hay or grain, are always deficient in selenium. And I learned this the hard way when I had a flock of sheep and had to supplement their selenium. And this was, I didn't know this yet, learning curve. But our soil is very devoid in selenium here. And so if it's something that you're not eating a lot of, and the different foods that it comes in, it's important to supplement it. And for that reason, I actually tend to buy my potatoes from PEI because their soil has much more selenium, and we need it. It's a really critical nutrient. So that's my piece on that. Sorry, that's my nutritionist talking there. Next slide. Okay, eggs. This is another thing that's really great to get from your farmer. And I actually was shocked, sticker shock at the grocery store the other day when I saw that just plain white eggs that came from some factory in the United States. The carton was like $5.67 a dozen. And I mean, I know farmer friends, they're selling their eggs for $4 a dozen. And I mean, I honestly don't believe that that's enough. I think they're not charging enough. But if you buy direct from farmers and you're able to do that, it's often actually now cheaper than the grocery store. Didn't used to be, but it is now. You can buy big flats at Costco where you get like 18 or 32 eggs in a flat, and those are usually a decent price. If you do find eggs on sale, they can be frozen and used later. So they're not really great if you freeze them and then you want to like make a fried egg. But if you're going to use it for baking, you can freeze it in an ice cube tray and then just pop them out of the ice cube tray and throw them in a baggie and have them in the freezer for when you want them. And that way they keep a really long time. Eggs have a really long shelf life anyway, but if you wanted to do it that way, you could. And then the other option is to keep backyard chickens if you have that space or that time. Next slide. Okay, spices and seasonings. We don't have a whole lot of what I would call spices that grow here locally in Canada. We have lots of herbs, lots of fresh herbs. We don't have the like turmeric and black pepper and the things that people need as spices. So I tend to buy these things at the bulk barn usually, or if I want a bigger quantity and I'm going to do that thing where I share with my community and we collaborate on a bigger order, I'll order it from somewhere like Mountain Rose Herbs. They do lots of spices and lots of seasonings, and they have really nice stuff, and a lot of it is certified organic. So you know that you're not getting a lot of chemicals in the spices that you're getting, and they're not contaminated with anything. Sometimes I will get those herbs from Spearville Flour Mill. They also have some. And occasionally I'll order from the local health food shop and buy like a bulk package from them, because most of the health food shops around here have bulk bins. And so I'll buy the bag that they would put in their bulk bin for other people to take little bits what they need. And that works really well. One point, this is my Achilles heel, is that I love spices, and I have more spices in my cupboard than I probably will ever use. And I would recommend people do a cupboard inventory to figure out what they use the most often, because I have spices that I bought like years ago and I don't want to throw them out, but I haven't used them because I've either forgotten what I bought them for or just haven't had the recipe inspiration. So figuring out sort of what you use the most often and then buying larger quantities of those ones is something I would recommend. Making a little garden on your windowsill, if you have the space and a sunny window, that's pretty easy to do. And you can grow things like basil or rosemary or oregano or sage. You can grow those things on your windowsill, which is kind of a nice little thing to be able to snip something like that, or green onions, like snip them and use them in your food, and they're fresh right there. You can regrow fresh herbs. So if you happen to buy some from the grocery store, a lot of them will regrow really easily if you keep like sort of the top leaves and strip just a little bit of the stem and poke it into some water. It will start to grow. And then if you want to turn it into a new potted plant, you can put it in dirt. But most of them will grow just in a glass of water. Green onions is one of my favorite to do this with. You can regrow them up to 3 times. So once you've cut the green top off, if you save the little white bit that's got the roots and you put that in a little bit of water, that will regrow 3 times before it kind of gives up on you. So that's a really nice way to save money too, is to just reuse the ones that you've done. And you can actually even regrow celery. I don't know if people know, you can regrow a lot of things. That's a tangent. um, and then salt. Salt is another thing that is always in my pantry, and I have a variety of different salts for a number of different reasons. They all offer different kinds of sodium and different minerals. And the ones that I gravitate to are kosher salt, which is a really good one for using for food fermentation. Sea salt, Himalayan, and then my favorite is Redmond real salt because it's got sort of the most complete mineral blend. Next slide. And we can send these slides out to our participants, I hope, in case this is really fast, I'm sure. So hopefully we can send these out. Okay, so for flours, wheat versus all-purpose. This is another debate. I was having a chat with a friend the other day about whether wheat was better as an all-purpose flour or whole wheat. And I always have both in my pantry, so I'm not hard on one side or the other. But I find that all-purpose tends to be more versatile and whole wheat tends to be more dense when I bake with it. So I'm more disappointed with my recipes more often if I use whole wheat for just everything across the board. One thing I will say about wheat, and this is, I don't want to go too far on a tangent, but for people who have a gluten sensitivity, this is not an allergy. I'm not talking about celiac. I'm talking about a sensitivity. Sometimes switching to wheat that was grown in Europe where they don't allow genetic modification, so no GMO, that wheat is more digestible for them. I recently switched to only ever buying Italian pasta, and it seems like it would be a really posh, expensive switch, but really it's maybe 50 cents more for the Italian pasta, and they sell it at every grocery store. And the Italian pasta is always non-GMO because it comes from Italy where they don't allow genetic modification. So that's something, that's a little bit of a tangent, but I thought it might be important. As like a do-it-yourself for self-rising flour, which is something that a lot of recipes will call for. You can do 1 cup of all-purpose and 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder, and that's 1 cup, makes 1 cup of self-rising flour. I mentioned it when we talked about oats, but you can blend your oats or buy oat flour for use in recipes. It's not necessarily a great flour for using 100% for your baking. So unless you're gluten-free and you need to be, oat flour also bakes up to be really dense, but it is nice blended in with other flours. And these flours, of course, the Spearville Flour Mill, go figure, is where I get most of my flours. So I usually buy a big bag of rye flour every year for doing my sourdough and other kinds of flours and things too that I split with friends if I don't use as much. Yeah. I think that's all I have to say about flours. Spearville does carry gluten-free flours as well, so that is an option for people who do need gluten-free options. Next slide. Okay, so this one is where it's going to get complicated because this stuff I can easily go on a big tangent. I'm just going to take a sip of my tea here and then I'm going to dig into this. Okay. All right, so part of enhancing the nutrition that comes from your food is actually treating your food slightly differently than we do right now. So there are lots of vitamins and minerals that are locked up in our food, and there are lots of things in our food, especially grains and some vegetables, that actually inhibit the digestion. And it's just how things are. So a couple of the tricks to get more nutrition out of your food is to do fermentation. So this is something that most people are familiar with now because eating fermented foods is one of the things that's highly recommended for increasing the health of your microbiome in your gut. So things like sourdough breads. So this is a fermented dough that you make for your bread that's let to sit for a certain amount of time. And as the fermentation happens, the yeasts and enzymes that are working in the process break down some of the things that are resisting the digestion. So it makes it easier for us to digest and makes the nutrition that's in the food more accessible to our digestion. So sourdough is one example. Lacto fermented vegetables. There are some beverages like kombucha or water kefir or milk kefir that are fermented beverages. Yogurt would be an example of that too. And that's a whole other webinar. That's like a weekend workshop for fermentation. There's a lot to talk about there, so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I could though. The next thing is food combining, and this is a different one. Back in I think it was in the 70s when it became really popular, that food combining was like this thing that people were doing where they were eating, not eating meat and potatoes together. And like that's not what this is about. But it's actually about putting foods together that enhance the absorption and digestion of the other thing. So vitamin C rich foods like fruits and vegetables match really well with foods that have iron, beef in particular. Beans in particular as well is a really good one. So it would be the kind of thing where you would cook a bean meal and have either a citrus with it or a potato with it, because potatoes have vitamin C, or you would do a really vitamin C rich salad, lots of leafy green vegetables. The vitamin C enhances the absorption of iron, and specifically the kind of iron that doesn't come from animal products. So it helps with the iron that comes from beef, but the foods that are vegetable based that have iron in them, the iron is a form that's less absorbable for our guts. And if we combine it with vitamin C, we can get more iron out of those non-meat foods. So that's something that's really important for people who don't eat a lot of meat for whatever reason. Fat with carrots, this is sort of a general, it's just how you remember it. It doesn't have to be carrots, but anything that has vitamin A in it. So when you think of all the things that are orange in color, orange and yellow, like squash, those things, sweet potatoes, carrots, I'm drawing a blank, but you get the idea. And then the dark green leafy things that have a lot of vitamin A in them, if you combine them with a little bit of fat, all of the vitamin A in those foods is a fat soluble vitamin. Vitamin A across the board is fat soluble. So if you combine it with a little bit of fat, whether it's butter or ghee or coconut oil or avocado oil or something like that, it will help to pull more vitamin A out of that food so that you can absorb it. This is a really simple one. Chew your food. And in this day and age, when everybody is very distracted and always in a hurry, it's one of those things that's super simple, but not a lot of people do it. And when I was studying in nutrition college, one of the things that the teacher would reiterate constantly was that we should chew our food until it's a paste in our mouth before we swallow it. How many people do that? So that's something. And I mean, to a paste is pretty extreme, but if you were to just pay attention sit down at one meal and pay attention to how long you tend to chew your food before you go to swallow it, you might notice that you do end up chewing a lot of food that's not really chewed up. It's just small enough to swallow it down. And breaking it into smaller pieces in your mouth makes it so much easier on your stomach that doesn't have any teeth. So that makes it really like a very simple way to get more out of your food. And if you notice what comes out on the other end, if you see any undigested food on the other end, that's a pretty good sign that you're not chewing well enough. That's definitely a sign you're not chewing well enough. And then the last thing is that if you don't have great digestion, meaning if you eat and then you burp a lot after you eat, or even while you're eating, if you're burping a lot, or if you end up with bloating or gas after you've eaten, sometimes that's a sign that your digestion is a little sluggish. And you could take some digestive enzymes. And I do that if I'm going to eat a good meal, like a big meal. I'll always take a digestive enzyme. It really helps a lot. And I've listed a few there that are different kinds. for different reasons. The betaine HCl is one that's sort of like for people who have really terrible digestion and need a lot of help. Papaya enzymes are, like it says, they come from papayas, and they really help to break down protein meals. So for people who have trouble with protein, that would be it. And then there's an enzyme called a broad spectrum, which would be one that is pretty good for just about anything that you want to eat, not specific to any one thing. So there's that. Now there might be questions about this part, so I will answer those at the end, but we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, this is my favorite part because the wild foods and plants are one of my biggest passions. So I've listed in this little bit, I've got 6 plants. I could probably list 100, but I tried to keep it limited so that it would be relatively easy. All of the plants that I've listed here are relatively recognizable, and I want to preface this with anybody who wants to go out and find wild foods in your neighborhood, please get a guide to take you out. Get a book or get someone who knows what they're looking at, and make sure that you know what you're picking. Don't just pick anything and put it in your mouth because I showed it to you in a slideshow. We have to make sure that we ID the food that we pick out of the ground and make sure that we know what we're consuming. All of the ones that I've got here are safe. Every single thing that I've listed in this one, you'll see the names. So if you want to look it up in a foraging book and find it, all of them are what's referred to as nutritive herbs. So they're all essentially food. You can't eat them all. Some of them you need to make a tea, and we'll go through that. But they are all nutritive. So they all offer a lot of nutrition to help to boost our, natural multivitamin capabilities. So the first one is stinging nettle. And this one is one of my personal favorites because I discovered it sort of by accident because it stung me. It is actually a plant that does sting you, and it's necessary to wear gloves when you pick it. If you don't wear gloves, you'll have very itchy and stingy hands for days. But when you cook it, the sting goes away. So you can steam it for food. If you wanted to eat it, you can steam it like you would spinach. And once it's wilted, when you wilt it, the sting is gone. So you basically wilt it and then it's ready to eat. I most often use it for tea, but you can do the thing where you steam it and use it then for pesto, or you can steam it and puree it and add it into a cake. I've made a cake with it before, and it's quite delicious. It tastes very green, like it kind of tastes, I guess, sort of like spinach, but a little bit more earthy. But it's a wonderful food. It's so rich in nutrition, and that will be one of the first ones to pop up in the spring. So anybody who's interested in looking for this plant, go out and search for it in the spring. It'll be low to the ground and you'll find it growing. And the really nice thing is that if you find a little bit of it, there usually is a lot of it. So you'll find it, and it's fantastic. Look it up. And then the next one is raspberry leaf. This is a plant that everybody pretty much knows. And I'm talking about the wild raspberries, not the raspberries that you buy from the grocery store, but this is the leaf of the wild raspberry plant. And this one is mostly used for tea. It's not, the leaf itself is not very tasty. So most people just use it for tea. And it's also very good this is a woman's plant. Men can consume raspberry leaf too. It's not harmful, but it's really supportive for women specifically because it helps to replace a lot of the minerals that we lose during our menstrual cycles. So that's a really amazing plant for that. And another fun thing that I do with raspberry leaves is make a vinegar infusion. And I do that by putting raspberry leaves in a mason jar, and then I top them with apple cider vinegar and let it sit for about 2 weeks. And then you strain out the leaves, and then you can use that vinegar for salads. But there's some kind of weird witch magic that happens in the bottle, because when you're done, the vinegar actually ends up tasting like dill. So for some reason, raspberry leaves, when you turn them into vinegar, taste like dill, and they make a really great salad dressing. So that's that for raspberry leaves. Horsetail is another really cool one, and that comes out early in the spring too. And if you can see on the slide, the little weird white thing that's in the center of the photo is what the plant looks like when it's immature. So you'll see that coming up in the spring. You'll see them usually growing on the roadsides. They tend to grow in like really rocky soil. So you'll find that little stem, and then later in the season, you'll see that little feathery green thing. And it has a look-alike. And the way that you tell them apart is that true horsetail has little leaves that point upward, and they're quite stiff. You'll often see another one that tends to grow in the forest. It grows in a different place, but its little feathery leaves sort of droop down, and it's very soft and feathery. So that's how you tell the difference. And it's also, if you bring a foraging guide with you, you won't make the mistake because it looks very different. It's similar, but it looks very different when you see them side by side in a book. Horsetail, same thing. It's not really edible, but it has a ton of silica, which is really good for our hair, skin, nails, and joints. So it's another really good one to include. And you make an infusion with that, which is to make a cup of tea. And then you can also use that to make a vinegar. And that vinegar doesn't have as distinctive a taste, but I often will do that vinegar because it's a really early spring one. And so I'll use it as kind of like a nutritive tonic. I'll make that vinegar and then I'll use it as I guess I would call it a digestive tonic, where I'll mix a tablespoon of that vinegar with a glass of water and just drink it as a mineral supplement, basically. And one thing is you can actually mix all of these herbs. Like say if you're out and you want to pick some raspberry leaves and you've got a little bit of horsetail and then you've got a little bit of stinging nettle, you can put them all in the same mason jar and cover it with vinegar and then use that nutritive vinegar kind of as a vitamin supplement. So there are a lot of different things that you can do with these wild plants. Let's go to the next slide. It's so easy to go down a rabbit hole. Oh my goodness. Okay, there's not enough time. These ones are also some more nourishing herbs, and these ones generally you use them for teas. So oat straw, this is different from oats that we talked about earlier. This is the straw portion of the oat. So on the slide, you can see the pods, like the seed pods. So that's where the rolled oat part comes from. And then the stem that it grows on is the straw. And that straw is super rich in magnesium. So it's a really good one for drinking that helps to like help your muscles relax. It's really good for helping to relax. It's a really nice herb, and it's also very calming for our nervous systems. So for people who are a little bit frayed, it's a really good one to help us sort of recenter and be a little bit more calm on a nourished level with our nervous system. Linden is a tree. This one, if you ever walk by a linden tree when it's in bloom, the fragrance is outstanding. You can literally smell the beautiful perfume that comes off this tree from like 50 feet away. Like it's amazing. It smells so good. And the picture that you see here is the blossom. The little flowers are the blossom, and then it has two little leaves that are sort of like little wings on the stem. And that whole thing, the stem and the two leaves and the blossom, is what is used when you buy linden tea. That's what you get. You get those leaves and the stem and the blossom. And linden tea is another one that's really nutritive. It's very, very soothing and does a lot of really good things for our digestive tract. So for people who have sort of an inflamed gut, if they've been like sick with a stomach flu, or even if you just have like digestive upset, food sensitivities, you ate something that didn't sit well, linden is a really good option for that. And then there's chickweed. This is another one that's good for an infusion, but it's also really tasty to eat raw. This is one of the ones in this group that is good to eat raw. This is a low growing plant. Almost everybody will have this growing at the edge of their driveway. It's that common. You have to look because it's just under your feet basically. But this plant is so good it's basically it's like spinach. It's delicious. It's so good. And you can turn it into pesto. You can turn it into salad. You can do tea with it. And it's another one that's really, really rich in all kinds of trace minerals. Next slide. Okay, now we're getting into the food. So these ones, same thing. Some of them you might recognize. The ones that you don't recognize, please make sure that you have a reference to check that the ID is correct before you eat it. So dandelion, pretty much everyone's going to know that one on this list. The leaf is edible on the dandelion, the root is edible on the dandelion, and the flower is also edible. The only part that I would recommend not eating, and it's only because it's really bitter, is the little green underbit underneath the yellow petals. If I'm going to use the petals in a salad, I'll generally sort of squeeze that little green bit at the bottom to push the petals out, and I'll just compost the other part because it's quite bitter. If you're going to harvest dandelion greens, the ones that don't have a blossom on them yet are the best tasting. So if it has a flower on it, usually the leaves are a little more bitter. They're not inedible, but they're just a little bit more bitter. And you can mix these greens, any one of the ones actually on this page, you can mix in with other lettuce if you want to make a salad. I will walk around my backyard with a little basket or a cloth bag, and I'll pick a wild salad of these things. And I'll show you some tools at the end that I use to make harvesting and eating these plants a little easier. The root on the dandelion plant is really good for our liver, and some people will dig them up in the spring when the soil is nice and moist and they're easy to get out because they are a bit of work. And you can throw a dandelion root. You've got to wash it because of course it's dirty, but you can throw a dandelion root into a smoothie, and it's a really good tonic for our liver in the spring. So if that's something that you're into, I would look at that when the ground starts to soften up a little bit again. Wood sorrel is a really tasty little green. It's a tiny little plant. It's hard to tell on the screen here, but those little leaves that are shaped like hearts taste like sour candy. So they're like really delicious just to eat them like that, but they also make a really nice little flavor in a salad if you're going to mix it with other things. It's like a little punch of sour as you're eating through it. Lamb's quarters is one that some people might notice, especially if you're a gardener, because it is a noxious weed. And lamb's quarters is another one that's really rich in the silica. That's really good for our skin, hair, nails, and bones. And you can actually see it on the surface of the plant. And you can kind of see it on the slide I have here, where the plant looks like it has a bit of a silvery dust on it. And that silvery dust is the silica that's on the plant. And when you see it, and if you go out looking for it, I'm sure you'll find it. It's not growing right now, it's too cold, but when it does come out, when you touch the plant, you can actually rub that silica off. And that's one of the ways that you know that that's the right plant, because you can see that silvery dust and it'll come off when you touch it. That one is so delicious. It's like liquid. It's like wild spinach. It's you can eat it raw, you can steam it. It's so good. All of these foods, I'm super passionate about this if you can't tell. All of these foods are really delicious. Then there's plantain. And plantain is another good one. It also is edible leaf and the seeds, interestingly enough. The leaf is salad material all summer long, starts growing in the spring, and you can basically eat it until the frost kills it. The seeds, the sort of tall thing that you can see on the plant is a seed pod, that like tall spiky thing. And at the end of the season, when these plants are about to go dormant, those little seeds will turn into like little brown spikes. And I'll go around my yard with a plastic container and strip the seeds off of the pod, strip them off the stalk into my container. And those seeds are very, very similar in the way they behave to chia seeds. So when you mix them with water, they sort of plump up and they make a fiber. And so you can use them in similar ways, whether you like to use chia seeds in your overnight oats, or if you use them in smoothies, or if you just mix them in with yogurt, or whatever you do with them. They're very similar to chia seeds, and they grow here, which is kind of cool. Next slide. Oh, that's it. Okay. How did I do for time? Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm back.
Wow, we're good with time. We're barely hanging.
Right. Whew, okay.
We're barely hanging in there.
Good.
So,
Okay.
yeah, but that is like a very awesome presentation. I have learned a lot, and I started to rethink about my food selection and how I choose my food. Like as you grow older, you would this saying will become more real to you, that you are what you eat. And when you were young, you're just eating some stuff, but eventually you'll have to take care of your gut and everything that is functioning in there, so that you can continue to enjoy what you eat. So but yeah, before I know it's time, and but if we can have like a quick segment on your questions. I'm looking at the chat here, so maybe so everyone, Sylvia was now interested on starting foraging. So
Oh, good.
thanks for the information. But I think do we have questions in here? I think so. I was sorry, I was sharing my screen, so I didn't have really the time to but there's one question here from Mackenzie that's from Kenzie that says, "Has anyone processed tallow themselves?" This is the first time I'm hearing about tallow.
Yeah, I process tallow myself all the time because as an herbalist, I use it to make a lot of skin preparations. So, like I said, skin things for eczema or psoriasis, that kind of thing. It's not terribly labor intensive, but you need to have the time to do it because you buy a lump of fat, raw fat from your butcher. The easiest way to do it is to either cut it up into small pieces when it's semi-frozen, because otherwise it's very slippery and it's very easy to cut yourself. Learn the hard way. Or you can ask your butcher to put it through the meat grinder, and then it'll be already cut up into small bits, and then you put it into either a Pyrex dish or a pot or I use a restaurant chafing pan. It's like one of those big metal pans. I do that much at a time. And I put it in there and I put just a little bit of water, like half an inch of water on the bottom. And then I put it in the oven on a very low temperature and I leave it until everything is melted. And then when I'm done, I strain out anything that's solid that might float and then let it solidify. And that's your tallow. I usually sort of pour it into bread pans and then freeze it in like 1 pound block kind of things when I'm going to use it. Yeah, but it's a bit labor intensive, but it's well worth it, and it has a really long shelf life. And you can keep it in the freezer if you don't want to, like, if you want to keep it for years, you can just keep it in the freezer.
But how about like the yield of making that tallow? Like, was it like when you try to process something and then it goes off like a very, very small
Oh
amount,
no,
or
you
is it
get
like
lots. You get
oh,
lots.
like a
Like
box? Okay.
when I do 20 pounds of tallow, like 20 pounds of raw, I probably get about 16 pounds of good. So there's a bit of waste, but most of it is good. And the waste, I usually use it to make bird feed, like bird feed things, because you can mix bird seed with it and it'll harden up into those things that birds like to eat. So yeah, it's not really waste. It's just food for somebody else.
Okay, that is nice to know. It's okay. Another thing that I have a question. This is like a personal question. I'm
Okay.
still waiting for the chat in case other people would have a chance to ask their questions. Um, my question is, is kombucha stronger than yogurt? Like,
Oh, for the probiotics?
yes.
Well, in all honesty, the cultures are different. So it's really tough to compare because kombucha has a different yeast strain than the bacteria in yogurt.
Mm. Okay, so because I heard like one of our friends, they say that you should slow, because there's a recent scenario that I finished like two bottles of kombucha, and then one of our friends told us that be careful with the kombucha because of the fermenting process. It's like a tea, it has probiotics and stuff like that. So I wonder, because I eat like yogurt like
Mhm.
maybe 2 times or maybe 3 times depending on how much I eat. So I'm not sure with kombucha anymore.
Okay,
So
yeah. Some people have a digestive response to kombucha. It does have probiotics in it, and there are a lot, but some people will have like a loose bowel movement because of
yes.
it. Yeah, so and it's one of those things where if you don't have a lot of that bacteria, that particular bacteria in your gut, sometimes your body will, pull the plug to try to get rid of it if it's not familiar. So yeah, it's good to go slow with that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you so much. I have a hand raised here for Zaria. Zaria, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I do actually. It's about the horsetails.
Oh,
So when
sure.
you use that, yeah, when you use that to make tea, would you just like simmer that essentially by itself to make tea, or would you add that to like another tea?
I would usually just do it on its own, and I make a preparation. Here's another piece, I guess, to the nutritive herbs. In order to make sure that I'm getting everything that I want out of that plant, I will make a preparation that's called a nourishing herbal infusion. And this is a very simple process, but you use one single plant so that you know what you're getting. It's not a blend. And I'll weigh out on my little scale. I actually have it here. I have a little scale that I use to weigh my herbs, and I'll weigh out 1 ounce of herbs. I don't know why it's 1 ounce, but that's what I learned in my herbal course. So you do 1 ounce of herbs, dry herbs, in 1 liter of water. And so I'll make a whole liter, and I'll do it the night before, where I make 1 liter of this water with my 1 ounce of herbs. I do it in a mason jar, like a regular mason jar like that. And I put the boiling water over it. I put a little lid on it and I let it sit all night. And then I strain out the solids in the morning. And then I drink that 1 liter throughout the day. And I do a different one of those nutritive herbs every day. And essentially, it's basically a way to get all of the range of multivitamins that you need from the plants that are growing. So I do like a round robin of the different plants, and I try to make sure that I do it. I'm not always 100%, but I try to make sure I do it 5 days a week. And then on the weekend, I don't worry about it because, life happens. But I try to get it done 5 days a week, 5 different plants, and do that nourishing infusion 5 days a week. So,
Very cool.
yeah.
Little follow-up. What does horsetail taste like? I only ask because I remember it like it grows so much at my mom's house.
Oh,
And we
okay.
always used to pick it as kids and like play with it, but I didn't know you could eat it.
Yep. It kind of tastes like grass.
Fair enough.
So it's not like super delicious, but I mean, I will make it. And once it's chilled, it's actually really refreshing. And the only one that I can't do the whole ounce because it's so bitter is the raspberry leaf. And if I'm going to do the raspberry leaf one, I usually drop it down to half an ounce for the 1 liter, because the 1 liter with 1 ounce was just way too bitter. So I'll just like knock it back a little bit to, I know I'm not going to drink it if it's too bitter. So I'll just knock
Mhm.
it back to half an ounce. But yeah, they all actually taste pretty good. The oat straw is my favorite because it is so sweet. It's really, really like sweet and creamy almost the way it tastes. So it's a really good one. Oat straw day is my favorite.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jossilynn, I have a question. Um, do you have any resources that you wanted to share? Like, for example, if you're first
Yes.
time foraging,
Yeah,
for anything,
I definitely do.
maybe
Okay.
you can share it with us.
Yeah, let's start with a couple of tools, and then I have a few books here that I want to hold up in front of the camera because they're some of my favorites for the different things that we talked about. So, for foraging, I have a couple of tools that I really like to use. This is one of them. This is a little, I don't know what it's called. I call it my finger snipper, because it's a little thing that I slip on my finger like that. And then when I'm out foraging, I can just snip. So say for example, if I was out getting stinging nettle, some of the plants that you want to pick don't have a stem that just snaps easily when you pluck it with your fingers.
Mhm,
So with stinging nettle, I would have a glove on this hand, remember that part. And
mhm.
then you can use this little blade to snip the stem. And I have used this so much, and I think it was like $3 on Amazon. It was such a good buy. And it makes it like so much easier because you don't have to carry a pair of scissors.
What do you
Um,
call that one again?
I
Is it
called
a
it I called it a finger snipper. Like if you just
finger snipper?
search finger snipper for
Okay.
foraging and see what comes up, because I'm pretty sure I don't know, I stumbled across it somehow, but anyway, it's one of my favorite things and I don't even know what it's called. I should figure that out. The other thing that I really like, and I got these at Lee Valley Tools, and it's a pair of scissors with 5 blades. And it's really great for when I'm harvesting these like things that I use for salads. I will bring them in the house, and I usually organize them because I have a basket that I've got a whole bunch of stuff in, but I'll organize them like, here's all the plantain leaves, here's all the lamb's quarters, here's all the dandelion leaves, and I'll lay them on top of one another so that they're stacked. And then I'll use these scissors to cut them into ribbons, and that makes them a lot easier to eat. Some of the leaves are really chewy, like they've got a lot of fiber, and so they take a lot of jaw power to get through them. But if I make them into ribbons with these scissors, they're a lot easier to eat. And you can do that with just a regular old pair of kitchen scissors if you want to. Sometimes the bigger leaves, like the plantains, I'll kind of like roll them and then slice them with the scissors, and that works really well too. What else do I want to show you? Oh, my yogurt maker. Okay. These are some awesome tools. This thing, it's called a Yogotherm. I found this at Value Village like 20 years ago, so don't look for one, but I'm just going to show you how easy it is to make yogurt at home. So this is a plastic yogurt container inside a styrofoam bucket. So you basically warm up your milk, throw in a little bit of yogurt that you bought at the grocery store or a probiotic capsule from your fridge, and you put it in this container, you put the lid on, and you let it sit overnight, and that's yogurt. It's super easy. Lots of YouTube videos out there about how to make yogurt. And I mean, this is a really cute little way to do it because it's round and it's got Yogotherm written on it, but you can do it with one of those cheap styrofoam coolers, and you fill the cooler with warm water, and you put your container inside with your milk that's got the yogurt added to it, and you're good to go. Oh, yes. Sorry, you're right. Most Instant Pots do have a yogurt setting. So this is the low-tech way to do it for sure, but it works. It works. Okay, so some books that I want to share with you that might be some good inspiration. This one is Billy Joe Tatum's Wild Food Field Guide and Cookbook. And it's a tiny little book. Like you can see, it's really small. But there are like 300 recipes in here for how to use wild foods, everything from like acorns to dandelions to what else? Elderberry and grape jelly. Anyway, not going to go down that rabbit hole tonight. I could scan this book for hours. This is one of my favorites because it's given me ideas on how to use things that I've seen, but I would never know. Like I know it's edible, like intellectually, I know it's edible, but I don't know what the heck to do with it. So that book is a really good thing. There are no pictures in it though, so bring a field guide. This one.
Sorry, Jossilynn, I'll just have to cut you. What is the title again? So I could type it out in here. John Reese is asking about it.
Yeah, it's Billy Joe Tatum's Wild Foods Field Guide and Cookbook.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Billy Joe.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Now this one. This is my absolute favorite one.
Will you show it to us?
Yes. Yes. So this is The Boreal Herbal, and it's written by Beverly Gray. She is in the Yukon, and she is a fantastic human. Anyway, this book is so amazing because it features all of the plants that grow in the northern climates. So
nice.
Everything from spruce to different kinds of flowers to different kinds of berries to the wintergreen that grows in our forests around here. And there are recipes in this book for everything from food products to healthcare to bath things to all kinds of stuff. And anyway, it's such a fantastic book. I absolutely love it. And then I've got 2 books about fermenting food that are really useful that I use a lot. And this is one of the pieces for enhancing the nutrition you get out of your food. So this one, The Art of Fermentation, is kind of a staple fermentation book.
That's nice.
And this one, the library has it for people who don't want to necessarily invest in this giant book. I don't remember how much it was. It might have been $50 when I bought it, but anyway, lots of recipes in this book that I've used, lots that I've tried and flopped, but it's a really good resource. And then this one, I make a lot more recipes out of this one, Real Food Fermentation.
Real Food Fermentation, okay.
Yep, and the author on that one is Alex Lewin.
Okay.
Yeah, so those are some of my favorite books on these topics. The Boreal Herbal, though, that's way up here.
Oh, yeah.
That's the best.
Thank you so much for that, Jossilynn. I have one more question. Which
Sure.
plant do you believe is more financially beneficial? It's a question from John Duru.
What do I
Which,
find?
which, which plant do you believe is more financially beneficial?
Financially beneficial. Which
Yeah,
plant?
I think it's on the
Oh,
chat. I'm not sure if you see it.
okay. Hang on. Let me just. Which plant financially beneficial? Is this a question that's about sort of like the economics of harvesting and selling these plants? Is that?
I'm actually, yeah, yes.
Oh, yes. Okay. So, there are some plants that are more valuable than others. If you pay attention to trends, this is not a plant that was in my presentation, but if you pay attention to trends, the elderberry right now is booming.
Mhm.
When I first started harvesting elderberries, I was lucky enough to find that the property that I live on just has some growing wild. But recently, I've noticed that people are selling elderberry starts. So, like little trees that are this big that aren't going to make berries for probably 4 years. People are selling those little trees for $25, which is shocking to me because
Oh my gosh.
the first time I bought an elderberry start, it was $4.95.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, you can kind of keep tabs on what plants seem to be really popular. None of the ones that I listed are super expensive. The oat straw is one that I always have to buy because I don't grow a field of oats to harvest them from. And I want oats from a source that doesn't spray their fields. So I buy organic oat straw from Richter's Herbs. That's a really good source. Like if you want to buy these herbs in bulk rather than having to harvest them, Richter's, it's spelled Richter''S. They're based out of Ontario. Richter's Herbs has a lot of really good dried plant material and also lots of seeds too for anybody who wants to grow different things.
Thank you so much for that, Jossilynn. And I don't think we have any more questions from our audience. So I know we got a bit of time, but this is like very valuable information that we just get from. So Rika, yeah, thank you so much for that. Please be aware that when you are foraging, to only take a small amount of what you find. Okay.
Yes, thank you,
Yes.
Rika. That's really an important point.
Over harvest.
This would be when I do a foraging webinar, this will be number one.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Jossilynn. And for everyone out there, thank you so much for joining us once again for this webinar series. This is the last of our webinar series for Here We Grow. And don't forget, we will be announcing our winner for our veggie pod and the kit. Thank you so much for everything and for sharing this information with us, Jossilynn. And I hope we see each other well into more collaborations to go with our indoor farm. Thank you so much. And
Thank
good
you.
evening, everyone. Have a good night.